What I Found in My Pockets by K Chesterton. I have only once in my life picked a pocket, and then, perhaps through some absent-mindedness, I picked my own. My act can really with some reason be so described, for in taking things out of my own pockets I had at least one of the more tense and quivering emotions of the thief. I had a complete ignorance and a profound curiosity as to what I should find there. Perhaps it would be the exaggeration of eulogy to call me a tidy person, but I can always pretty satisfactorily account for all of my possessions. I can always tell where they are, and I can always tell what I have done with them, so long, that is, as I keep them out of my pockets. If once anything slips into those unknown abysses, I wave it a sad Virgilian farewell. I suppose that the things that I've dropped into my pockets are still there. The same presumption applies to the things that I've dropped into the sea. But I regard the riches stored in both of these bottomless chasms with the same reverent ignorance. They tell us that on the last day the sea will give up the dead, and I suppose that on the same occasion long strings of extraordinary things will come running out of my pockets. But I've quite forgotten what any of them are, and there is really nothing except for money that I shall at all be surprised at finding among them. Such, at least, has hitherto been my own state of innocence. I here only wish briefly to recall one special, extraordinary, and hitherto unprecedented circumstance, which led me in cold blood and of sound mind yet to turn my pockets inside out. I was once locked up in a third-class train carriage for a rather long journey. The time was towards evening, but honestly it might have been anything, for everything resembling earth or sky or light or shade was painted out as if with a great wet brush by an unshifting sheet of quite colourless rain. I had no books or newspapers. I had not even a pencil and a scrap of paper with which to write a religious epic. There were no advertisements on the walls of the carriage. Otherwise I could have plunged into the study, for any collection of printed words is quite enough to suggest infinite complexities of mental ingenuity. When I find myself opposite the words sunlight soap, I can exhaust all the aspects of sun worship, Apollo, and summer poetry before I go on to the less congenial subject of soap. But there is no printed word, there is no picture anywhere, there is nothing but blank wood inside the carriage and blank wet without. Now, I deny always, most energetically, that anything is or even can be uninteresting. So I stared at the joints of the walls and the seats, and I began thinking hard on the fascinating subject of wood. And just as I had begun to realize why perhaps it was that Christ was a carpenter rather than a bricklayer or a baker or anything else, I suddenly started upright, and I remembered my pockets. All this time I was carrying about with me an unknown treasury. I had a British Museum and a South Kensington collection of unknown curiousness hung all over me in different places. So I began to take the things out. The first thing I came upon consisted of piles and heaps of Battersea tram tickets. They were enough to equip a paper chase. They shook down around me in showers like confetti. Primarily, of course, they touched my homely patriotic emotions, and brought tears to my eyes, and also they provided me with the printed matter I required, for I found on the back of them some short but striking little scientific essays about some kind of pill. Comparatively speaking, in my then destitution, those tickets might as well be regarded as a small but well-chosen scientific library. Should my railway journey continue, which seemed likely at the time, for a few months longer, I could imagine myself throwing myself into the controversial aspects of this pill, composing replies and rejoinders, pros and cons, upon the data furnished to me. But after all, it was the symbolic quality of the tickets that moved me the most. For as certainly as the cross of St. George means English patriotism, those scraps of paper meant all that communal patriotism, which is now, perhaps, the greatest hope of England. The next thing that I took out was a pocket knife. A pocket knife, I need hardly say, would require a thick book full of moral meditations all to itself. A knife typifies one of the most primary of those practical origins, upon which, as upon low, thick pillows, all our human civilization rests. Metals, the mystery of the thing called iron, the mystery of the thing called steel, led me into half-dazed dream of sorts. I saw into the entrails of dim, damp woods where the first man, among all the common stones, found the one strange stone. I saw a vague and violent battle before me, in which stone axes broke and stone knives were splintered against something shining and new in the hands of one desperate man. I heard all the hammers on all the anvils of the earth. I saw all the swords of feudal and all the wheels of industrial war. For the knife, after all, is only a short sword, and the pocket knife is a secret sword. I opened it, and I looked at that brilliant and terrible tongue which we call a blade, and I thought that perhaps it was the symbol of the oldest of the needs of man. The next moment I knew that I was wrong, for the thing that came next out of my pocket was a box of matches. Then I saw fire, which is stronger even than steel. This old, fierce, female thing, the thing we all love, we all need, but dare not touch. The next thing I found was a piece of chalk, and I saw in that chalk all the art, all the frescoes of the world. The next was a coin of a very modest value, and still I saw in it not only the image and superscription of our very own Caesar, but I saw all government and order since the world began. But honestly, I have not space to say what were the items in the long and splendid procession of poetical symbols that came pouring out. I cannot tell you all the things that were in my pockets. I can tell you one thing, however, that I could not find in my pockets, and I allude to my railway tickets. What I found in my pockets is an excerpt from the book Tremendous Trifles, published in 1909, and it is in the public domain via Project Gutenberg. The author, G.K., full name Gilbert Keith Chesterton, was born on the 29th of May 1874 and died on the 14th of June 1936. He was a sharp-thinking and quick-witted English writer, a lay theologian, a poet, a philosopher, a dramatist, a journalist, an orator, a literary and art critic, a biographer, and, perhaps most importantly, a Christian apologist. Chesterton is much read even today, and is often referred to as the Prince of Paradox.